Minimum wage in the United States.
In the United States, workers generally must be paid no less than the statutory minimum wage. As of July 2009, the federal government mandates a nationwide minimum wage level of $7.25 per hour, while some states and municipalities have set minimum wage levels higher than the federal level, with the highest state minimum wage being $9.32 per hour in Washington as of January 1, 2014. On March 26, 2014, Connecticut passed legislation to raise the minimum wage from $8.70 to $10.10 by 2017, the first state to address President Obama's call for an increase on minimum wage. Among those paid by the hour in 2013, 1.5 million were reported as earning exactly the prevailing federal minimum wage. About 1.8 million were reported as earning wages below the minimum. Together, these 3.3 million workers with wages at or below the minimum represent, respectively, 1.0% of the population, 1.6% of the labor force, 2.5% of all workers, and 4.3% of hourly workers. To adjust for increased rates of worker productivity in the United States, raising the minimum wage to $22, or more, an hour has been presented.
Federal minimum wage.
Since it was last reset on July 24, 2009, the federal minimum wage in the United States has been $7.25 per hour. Some U.S. territories, such as American Samoa, are exempt. Some types of labor are also exempt. Employers may pay tipped labor a minimum of $2.13 per hour, as long as the hourly wage plus tip income equals at least the minimum wage. Persons under the age of May 20 be paid $4.25 an hour for the first 90 calendar days of employment, sometimes known as a youth, teen, or training wage, unless a higher state minimum exists. The July 24, 2009 increase was the last of three steps of the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2007. The wage increase was signed into law on May 25, 2007, as a rider to the U.S. Troop Readiness, Veterans Care, Katrina Recovery, and Iraq Accountability Appropriations Act, 2007. The bill also contained almost $5 billion in tax cuts for small businesses. The Supreme Court held that the federal minimum wage is constitutional and does not exceed the scope of the Commerce Clause in U.S. v. Darby Lumber Company, 312 U.S. 100, 1941. In April 2014, the United States Senate debated the Minimum Wage Fairness Act, S. 1737. 113th Congress. The bill would amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, FLSA, to increase the federal minimum wage for employees to $10.10 per hour over the course of a two-year period. The bill was strongly supported by President Barack Obama and many of the Democratic senators, but strongly opposed by Republicans in the Senate and House.
List of minimum wage levels by jurisdiction.
This is a list of the minimum wages, per hour, in each state and territory of the United States, for jobs covered by federal minimum wage laws. If the job is not subject to the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, then state, city, or other local laws may determine the minimum wage. A common exemption to the federal minimum wage is a company having revenue of less than $500,000 per year while not engaging in any interstate commerce. Under the federal law, workers who receive a portion of their salary from tips, such as wait staff, are required only to have their total compensation, including tips, meet the minimum wage. Thus, often, their hourly wage, before tips, is less than the minimum wage. 7 states, and Guam, do not allow for a tip credit. Additional exemptions to the minimum wage include many seasonal employees, student employees, and certain disabled employees as specified by the FLSA. In addition, some counties and/or cities within states may observe a higher minimum wage than the rest of the state in which they are located. Sometimes this higher wage will apply only to businesses that are under contract to the local government itself, while in other cases the higher minimum will be enforced across the board.
State.
Note: the following tables can be sorted alphabetically or numerically using the icon.
Territory. Prior U.S. minimum wages laws.
In 1912, Massachusetts organized a commission to recommend non-compulsory minimum wages for women and children. Within 8 years, at least 13 U.S. states and the District of Columbia would pass minimum wage laws. The Lochner-era United States Supreme Court consistently invalidated compulsory minimum wage laws. Such laws, said the court, were unconstitutional for interfering with the ability of employers to freely negotiate appropriate wage contracts with employees. The first attempt at establishing a national minimum wage came in 1933, when a 25 cents per hour standard was set as part of the National Industrial Recovery Act. However, in the 1935 court case Skitch Poultry Corporation v. United States, 295 U.S. 495, the United States Supreme Court declared the act unconstitutional, and the minimum wage was abolished. The minimum wage was re-established in the United States in 1938, pursuant to the Fair Labor Standards Act, once again at 25 cents per hour, $4.10 in 2012. In United States v. Darby Lumber Company, 1941, the Supreme Court upheld the Fair Labor Standards Act, holding that Congress had the power under the Commerce Clause to regulate employment conditions. The minimum wage had its highest purchasing value ever in 1968, when it was $1.60 per hour, $10.79 in 2014. From January 1981 to April 1990, the minimum wage was frozen at $3.35 per hour, then a record-setting wage freeze. From September 1, 1997 through July 23, 2007, the federal minimum wage remained constant at $5.15 per hour, breaking the old record. Congress then gave states the power to set their minimum wages above the federal level. As of July 1, 2010, 14 states had done so. Some government entities, such as counties and cities, observed minimum wages that are higher than the state as a whole. One notable example of this is Santa Fe, New Mexico, whose $9.50 per hour minimum wage was the highest in the nation, until San Francisco increased its minimum wage to $9.79 in 2009. Another device to increase wages, living wage ordinances, generally apply only to businesses that are under contract to the local government itself. On November 7, 2006, voters in 6 states, Arizona, Colorado, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and Ohio, approved statewide increases in the state minimum wage. The amounts of these increases ranged from $1 to $1.70 per hour, and all increases are designed to annually index to inflation. Some politicians in the United States advocate linking the minimum wage to the Consumer Price Index, thereby increasing the wage automatically each year based on increases to the Consumer Price Index. So far, Ohio, Oregon, Missouri, Vermont and Washington have linked their minimum wages to the Consumer Price Index. Minimum wage indexing also takes place each year in Florida, San Francisco, California, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Minimum wage jobs rarely include health insurance coverage, although that is changing in some parts of the United States where the cost of living is high, such as California.
Economists' analysis.
According to a paper written in 2000 by Fuller and Guide Stevenson, 73.5%, 27.9% of which agreed with provisos, of American economists agreed that a minimum wage increases unemployment among unskilled and young workers, while 26.5% disagreed with this statement. Some idea of the empirical problems of this debate can be seen by looking at recent trends in the United States. The minimum wage fell about 29% in real terms between 1979 and 2003. For the median worker, real hourly earnings have increased since 1979. However, for the lowest deciles, there have been significant decreases in the real wage without much decrease in the rate of unemployment. Some argue that an increasing minimum wage might reduce youth employment, since these workers are likely to have fewer skills than older workers. Furthermore, some economics research has shown that restaurant prices rise in response to minimum wage increases. Overall, there is no consensus between economists about the effects of minimum wages on youth employment, although empirical evidence suggests that this group is most vulnerable to high minimum wages.
Reasons for economic controversy.
Classical economics argues that the quantity of labor demanded increases as the price of labor falls. Each firm must evaluate the potential to make a profit from each worker hired. If the workers cost less, then more profit can be made from hiring more workers at a lower price. Therefore, by setting a lower boundary to wages, a minimum wage law prevents firms from offering jobs below the minimum and increases unemployment. Some research suggests a 10% increase in the minimum wage lowers low-skill employment by 2 to 4% and total restaurant employment by 1 to 3%. In Keynesian economics the perspective is different. Although employers and workers set their wages in nominal terms, they are unable to predict the exact purchasing power of those wages. The value of the real wage can only be known ex post, long after the workers have been paid. Neither unions nor government authorities know the real wage and can only approximate it by regulating the nominal wage. The real wage is the purchasing power of wages when adjusted for inflation, but inflation, the purchasing power of money and therefore of wages, depends on total levels of investment. Investment, in its turn, depends upon consumption, and consumption depends upon the marginal propensity to consume, savings rate, across all income categories. In an underconsumption scenario, the transfer of income from entrepreneurs and rentiers, those with higher incomes, to the working class, via union wage agreements and minimum wages, can actually lead to an increase in total consumption and higher demand for goods, leading to increased employment. However, the resulting higher price levels may spur several forms of political and institutional responses that blunt or negate this tendency. For one, inflation tends to transfer income from bondholders, rentiers, to wage earners. For another, entrepreneurs may, under conditions of oligopoly, be able to blunt the effect of rising wages by using their market power to raise prices fast enough to prevent real gains among workers. And finally, the central bank may intervene to defend price levels by increasing interest rates, which will tend to curb investment and decrease the demand for labor. Without choosing from among these perspectives, it is sufficient to say that minimum wage increases are unlikely to have a simple linear effect on employment. The interconnection of price levels, central bank policy, wage agreements, and total aggregate demand creates a situation in which the conclusions drawn from macroeconomic analysis are highly influenced by the underlying assumptions of the interpreter.
Jobs affected by the minimum wage.
The jobs that are most likely to be directly affected by the minimum wage are the ones that pay a wage close to the minimum. According to the May 2006 National Occupational Employment and Wage Estimates, the four lowest paid occupational sectors in May 2006, when the federal minimum wage was $5.15 per hour, were the following. 2 years later, in May 2008, when the federal minimum wage was $5.85 per hour and was about to increase to $6.55 per hour in July 2008, these same sectors were still the lowest paying, but their situation, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, was. In 2006, workers in the following 13 individual occupations received, on average, a median hourly wage of less than $8 per hour. In 2008, only 2 occupations paid a median wage less than $8 per hour. According to the May 2009 National Occupational Employment and Wage Estimates, the lowest paid occupational sectors in May 2009, when the federal minimum wage was $7.25 per hour, were the following.